Hey, Skills Champions. It's Andy Van Kleunen, CEO of National Skills Coalition, here today with Managing Director of Government Affairs for NSC, Katie Spiker. Katie, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Andy?
Just great. So we're here for another installment of Skills on the Hill. So Katie, it's August, usually a slow, sleepy time, but not so much in Washington. Washington's only getting 1 week off. This is it. And you were talking to us last week about how busy the Senate was getting off their plates both the bipartisan infrastructure bill as well as the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package. And they've now passed that all over to the House, and the House is going to be coming back into session next week. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what all that means come next Monday?
Sure. Yes, we're in 1 week of what's usually a month of recess, and with the House back next week, they'll take up that first step in the reconciliation process that you talked about, that the Senate passed. And from there, once they pass that piece, then the committees in the House will spend most of the next few weeks figuring out how to spend their allocation under that bigger bill. The infrastructure package, the bipartisan package that the Senate passed, the House will hold on to that. So Speaker Pelosi has said that she's going to wait until the Senate passes their reconciliation package before the House is going to vote on that bipartisan package. Her theory and strategy there is to bring along moderates, both in the House and the Senate, to ensure that she's passing both this bipartisan package and then the larger $3.5 trillion reconciliation package.
So why the back and forth with the reconciliation package? I mean, I know, and when you've been talking to folks about the infrastructure package, we want to see training go into that package. We didn't see any investments in training for the folks who've been laid off by the pandemic to get some of those jobs. So that's where this reconciliation package seems to be pretty important. So what does all that mean for the skills investments that we didn't get in infrastructure that now we want to see in reconciliation?
So the piece that the Senate passed and that the House will pass next week gave instructions to each committee, both on what they should write legislation and fund, and a top line level of funding for each committee. Most of the investments that we're likely to see, or that we could see in skills, is going to come out of the allocation that was given to the House Education, Labor, and the Senate Help Committee. Those committees got a top line allocation of that $3.5 trillion. They got $726 billion to spend on the priorities under their jurisdiction. It sounds like a lot of money, obviously, but there are a lot of important priorities that fall under their jurisdiction, both that our network and we have talked about and advocated for. So that under their jurisdiction fall things like the access to free community college. That's obviously going to be one of the key ways that folks who need training are going to get back into the workforce and be able to meet both their need and industry demand. Also under the Ed and Labor and Help jurisdictions are things like universal pre-K and expanded access to childcare for working families. Taken together, those three proposals alone, if the committees fund them at the levels proposed in the America's Family Plan, would add up to $550 billion of that $726 billion top line. So it means that those committees have a lot of pieces to fit together and a lot of really important priorities to fund with money that's going to be pulled in a lot of different directions. It really gets tricky then, because the committee needs to fit in the priorities like those big ones that we talked about, as well as other strategies for workers to be able to access skills and get back in the workforce.
So just to repeat back, so we have $726 billion for Ed and Labor. You know, our coalition has advocated a lot for investments in community colleges, one of the ways to get back into the labor market for folks who need new skills. But we have this other $100 billion of investment that the president proposed as part of the American Jobs Plan. So why is it that we're pitting two different types of investments that we need to get folks back into the economy? Why is skills training being pitted against community colleges and other kinds of what we think are really worthy investments as part of the recovery package?
I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to that 726 billion is what the committee has to work with. And this is where advocacy from folks in our network and other national organizations is so critical to help committee staff understand that you can't have an either or, and you can't have one strategy that's going to help all of the millions of workers who are still trying to access skills so that they can get back into the workforce. And then the other added complication here is just the timeline with which the committees in the House and the Senate are working. Right now, there's a deadline in the instructions that all the committees have to try and move forward in the House with these proposals and have legislation written by September 15th. I think that deadline is a little soft. There's no huge teeth on it for the committees, but it does mean that these conversations are happening really over the next 3 weeks. And then there's conversations happening from members of the Senate that they expect to, or they're hoping to try and have the entire reconciliation package pass through the Senate by the end of October. So there's a lot of moving pieces. There's not a ton of money, even though it sounds like a huge number. And they've got a pretty quick timeline to try and put together legislation to spend all of these investments.
So September 15th, sounds like none of us are going to get any vacation for the next few weeks. So we're going to have to try to make sure, to your point, that we're looking at all those kinds of investments for folks to get back into the labor market. So where is President Biden and some of his cabinet secretaries, where are they weighing in on this? Because obviously this is all being in response to the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan that the president put out a few months ago. How are they weighing in on these conversations with Congress?
Right, like you said, the Democrats in the House and the Senate that are putting together this legislative language are in many ways using that American Family Plan and Jobs Plan as the blueprint for the legislation that they'll put together. Secretary Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce, and Secretary of Labor Walsh have been traveling together this month doing a lot of conversations together. Some of that is coming out of really intentional interagency alignment and work that's happening between the Department of Commerce, Department of Labor, and Department of Education. And in that interagency cooperation where they're trying to figure out what are the real standards by which each agency is working on skills issues. The Department of Commerce is soliciting proposals right now for grants that would support partnerships in job training at the local level, their Good Jobs Challenge. The Department of Education just released guidance to student aid administrators at colleges to use discretion to help them make it easier for students to access higher amounts of federal financial aid. I should also mention, obviously, that you were talking to Secretary Walsh today. Folks in our network will get a separate invitation email to a fireside chat with you and Secretary Walsh that's happening next week. And so we really have seen those cabinet secretaries leaning into the proposals and advocating for that $100 billion that was called for in the American Jobs Plan, as well as those priorities around childcare, pre-K, free access to community college.
Yeah, thanks for the plug on that. Obviously, we're really pleased that members of the president's cabinet are willing to kind of go to Congress to say how important these investments in workforce training are to being part of this recovery package. So that's what they're doing. But in terms of what we and our members could be doing, I know that we've got a couple different letters that we've been asking for folks to sign on to. Maybe you can just say a little bit about that and where folks can find those.
Sure, we'll share the links along with this video to two separate letters. The first for workforce advocates and practitioners, urging leaders in Congress to invest that $100 billion in workforce and skills training, and a second targeted specifically to industry associations and businesses. This is a really key voice that members of Congress need to hear in these conversations to recognize the role and importance to the folks that are going to hire workers to these investments and skills as part of any economic recovery.
Excellent. So everybody, make sure your organization signs on to those letters and your partners do that as well. Thanks, Katie, for another great update.
Thanks, Andy.
And we'll see you next week.